And good afternoon, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and welcome to another episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I am your host, Tony Defeo, and thank you, as always, for joining me on another fine Saturday afternoon. And I thank you, everybody in the live chat, for stepping in. And before I get started, as always, I'd like to welcome you to subscribe to Behind the Steel Curtain's YouTube channel, where we bring you multiple podcasts each and every day. There's this show, obviously, every Saturday. There's the live mic. I believe that's Friday night. That's hosted by Michael Beck. There's Beck in Black, hosted by Michael Beck and Jeffrey Benedict. That's Wednesdays at 9, I believe. There's Let's Ride, hosted by co-editor, Behind the Steel Curtain co-editor Jeff Hartman, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's an audio. You have to find that one on the various podcasting platforms. That's really great stuff. He had a longtime contributor to Behind the Steel Curtain on the other day. Cliff Harris is still a punk. That's his Behind the Steel Curtain name, and he's always done a great job with film breakdown, and he's a high school coach, so he knows a lot about the game of football, and that was really great. I really enjoy listening to that. So if you can find that, go check that out. There's the Stat Geek, the Big Bro Sco show, hosted by, or I'm sorry, the Sco Bro show, if I can get those words out, hosted by co-editor Dave Schofield and his big brother. That's a pretty good show. And there's the Standard. There's the Steelers Preview. There's just so many shows. Jeff's been doing a daily training camp recap. Check that out. That's another audio show. It's on the podcasting platforms. And of course, there's Steelers Q&A every Monday at 5, hosted by Brian Anthony Davis, the podcasting manager. He's been doing a great job. Him and Dave and Jeff, they've been doing a great job of making sure your podcasting experience is the best it can possibly be for all the Steelers content you need on the internet. And also, the Steelers Retro Show that airs. That's another audio only podcast that airs Tuesday mornings, where we discuss a great moment from the Steelers past. I really enjoy doing that show, so please check that out. And as always, check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website, where we bring you just about everything you need each and every day, from news to film breakdowns to commentary, salary cap. Anytime there's a transaction, anytime there's an injury, anytime there's breaking news, it's right there for you. So please check that out. And again, welcome to everybody in the live chat. There's Lumberzack. I love that name. Brian O'Toole, always a favorite, always a regular. Steelers Pittsburgh. Dave Shipley, the legend. My man Wes Hickok. Ezra, thank you for joining me. And as always, I want to touch on a few different topics, and they mostly have to do with Steelers training camp, because that's the thing that's going on right now. We're only 2 weeks away, believe it or not. 2 weeks from this Monday, the Steelers will be taking on the Giants on Monday Night Football, and they are just about wrapping up their second week of padded practices. And I just wanted to share some of my observations from last week. And I think the first thing, as always, you have to talk about Ben Roethlisberger and the continued progress he's made after having major elbow surgery last year, and the extensive rehab that followed, and the questions of whether or not he could come back. Well, they continue to be answered. I wrote an article about his, I was making fun of his toughness, and it was a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, but I was struck by the fact that since the surgery and since he's been going at it pretty strongly at training camp, with the throwing and everything that goes into preparing for an NFL season, he keeps waiting for the pain in his elbow to return, and it has yet to return, which is obviously great news. And he talked about, and it was in a Yahoo article that I found online, he talked about having a small tear in his elbow for over a decade, and how he just dealt with it. And I thought that was amazing. Again, I wrote an article giving him a hard time, and there's no question that there's a bit of a diva to Ben when it comes to his history with embellishing injuries a little bit. In his early in his career, there was the big controversy over broken toes that he had, that Bill Cowher, his head coach at the time, had no idea. He was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he had an appendectomy a year or so later. And he talked about having a high fever. Again, this caught people by surprise. So there's no question that Ben has always embellished his injuries a little bit. I don't know if that's for effect, to get his teammates fired up, because Terry Bradshaw was guilty of the same thing. And he's said in interviews and, since his playing days that he kind of did that to get his guys fired up. And if they saw him writhing around on the ground at Three River Stadium, they would come to his rescue, so to speak, by playing better. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's just who Ben is. It's just whatever reason. Some people just exaggerate things, especially when they're sick or they're hurt. It's just human nature for some people to do. But there's no questioning his toughness. I mean, obviously he's played with every injury imaginable throughout his career. He played behind a offensive line in the late 00s that was among the worst in the NFL, and he excelled. He helped them win a Super Bowl. So there's no questioning the guy's toughness. And I think the fact that he did, I have no doubt that he did play for years with a small tear in his tendon in his arm before it finally went kaput last year. And I think that illustrates, in a way, not only his toughness, but the fear that maybe a lot of these guys have when it comes to sort of shutting themselves down to have major surgery. Because, maybe you can come back better than ever, but maybe you can't. Maybe you're done. Maybe you're never going to be the same player that you were before ever again. Or I think there's a fear that a lot of these guys have, that if they miss time, even if they come back 100%, somebody's going to take their job. I mean, look at Drew Bledsoe. Obviously, that was for the best for the Patriots, but here's a guy that was one of the best quarterbacks of his time. He gets hurt. It's the kind of injury that's. I think it was a collapsed lung. I forget what it was, but he should have only missed a few games, but he wound up missing forever because Tom Brady came along and became the greatest quarterback, arguably, that ever lived. So, I think there's a certain fear that these guys live with, that if they do shut themselves down, that it could be the end of their career. And I think that's why a lot of these guys do play with injuries that maybe they should, have repaired. But I think it also illustrates just how talented this guy is. The fact that whether it was 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, however long he dealt with his elbow problem, and it was certainly a few years, because his offensive lineman even confirmed this a while ago. It just shows you how talented he truly is, and what a great athlete he really is, to be able to put up the numbers and accomplish some of the things that he's accomplished throughout his career. But that's all beside the point. The most important thing is he's pain-free right now. And I think that, again, I hate to repeat myself, but it could only mean great things for the Steelers in 2020 and beyond. So that's my first observation. And the second one is something I really enjoyed, and something that maybe I wouldn't even have known about if Jeff Hartman wouldn't have pointed it out to me. And he shared it on the site last week, and that's the new docuseries about Roethlisberger and the struggles that he went through, him and his family went through with trying to battle back from that injury. And of course that was pretty interesting. And obviously hearing the news the first time, and how his wife Ashley, and again, I wrote an article that got published where I kind of make fun of her giving him permission, but I knew what she meant. And that's the fact that we forget as fans, perhaps, is that when these guys have a lot more to worry about than just playing the game. They have to worry about their families, and in Ben's case, you're the breadwinner for the family, and obviously he's made a ton of money, but still there's a lot of money that was left to be made on his contract, and she was basically saying, look, if you want to retire, that's fine. I'll support you 100%. But I think it shows you the kind of a competitor he is, that he said, no, I'm not done yet. I appreciate it, but I'm not done. And I thought it was great I think it was only 15 minutes, that episode, and there will be more episodes. I assume they'll be released once a week. And I think it kind of maybe showed a more human side to Ben Roethlisberger, something that perhaps most people in the country, most football fans, don't want to see, because a lot of people don't like the guy. There's no question he's not a well-liked guy around the country. And for some people think he's disingenuous. Some people think it's obviously a lot of the reasons why people don't like him are because of either his past behavior when he was a younger guy or those allegations, which were pretty serious. So I think this documentary on YouTube, I think that this will go a long way in maybe humanizing him more to people, maybe making him more accessible to perhaps some of the national types around the country that never seemed to like the guy. I mean, and to that point, they talked about the struggles. Ashley, his wife especially, talked about how hurt they were when everything that went down with Antonio Brown last year between him and the Steelers, and Ben was made the scapegoat by a lot of people. What did Ben do to make Antonio Brown act like that? That was that kind of thing. He's a poor leader. He's a divisive member of that locker room, and so I think we always wonder at the time, why are the Steelers so quiet? Why they were taking a lot of shots from everybody, from all around, like former players, the media. Everybody was taking shots at the Steelers last year, even though Antonio Brown was the one out there basically acting like the bad guy. But for some reason, the Steelers were considered the heels by a lot of people. And everybody said, why are they so quiet? Doesn't this bother them? Well, clearly it did. Clearly it bothered his family. And to hear everybody, sort of ganging up on him in a national sense. So, and a lot of that's, I think, for effect too, honestly. I think a lot of it, people don't like the guy, but a lot of it is they know that Steeler fans are pretty passionate and they're going to react to it. So they're going to react more to negative takes than they are positive takes. So I think a lot of that goes into it too. But still, we think these people aren't paying attention, meaning the celebrity types, the athletes and their families, but clearly they are. How can you not in 2020 when social media is so prevalent? So I think it was a pretty interesting little 15 minutes of streaming TV I watched, and I can't wait to watch the next episode. Can't wait to see what how he what he went through during this journey of trying to battle back from the elbow surgery. So that's something to check out. If you haven't seen it, it's called Bigger Than Ben. That's the name that I saw when I looked it up. So give that a look on YouTube. It's only 15 minutes, so you can spare 15 minutes, right? So those are the two things about Ben I wanted to talk about. And the next thing I wanted to talk about was the hype that Chase Claypool. I didn't hear much about him over the first week of padded practices. It wasn't a whole lot of talk about Chase Claypool. Towards the end of the week, you started hearing some stuff. Ike Taylor called him like the LeBron James of basketball. I think it's what he said, meaning it was just going to be a big matchup problem for people. Joe Hayden started, chimed in, said he was becoming a problem in practice as far as being able to cover the guy. He was a handful. Keith Butler, the defensive coordinator, said he could certainly see the talent on display, and that if he had to plan for him, he would probably try to double team him. And again, I don't know if this is all hype, as I wrote about in my article from today. I don't know if this is all hype or if this is real. But if it is real, I think it's encouraging because, I usually get excited about draft picks right after the draft, but then, once you get closer to the season, the more the focus is usually on the veterans and if they're ready to help the team win that year. And when it comes to receivers, I think it was Dave Schofield said about a year ago, talking about the 2019 draft class. It's like whatever you get, it's best not to expect anything from receivers because they struggle a lot early on, especially the rookie. A lot of them, like for every Deontay Johnson, there's a James Washington, guys that just struggle to pick up the offense and to gain the trust of the quarterback. And it has been said that Ben Roethlisberger doesn't really trust rookie receivers right away. They have to earn his trust. I think that's the case for a lot of quarterbacks of his ilk. So if it's true, if all the hype is true about Chase Claypool, I'm actually more sorry that there aren't preseason games to to kind of see the guy do his thing, because it would have been nice to see him put his skills on display for 3 or 4 games or 5 games, whatever there would have been this summer. But it's kind of making me intrigued about the role he's going to play in the offense in 2020, because I mean, think about it. You have obviously Juju Smith-Schuster, James Washington, Deontay Johnson. They're going to factor heavily into the passing game. And then in Vance McDonald, Eric Ebron, the new tight end that they signed, they're obviously going to be huge parts of the passing game. A lot of people have been joking about Ryan Switzer and his bromance with Big Ben, so that they think he's going to be allotted some targets. And of course, the running backs are often targets out of the backfield in this offense. So, it's kind of going to be interesting to see if they really do try to have a plan for him in that offense. If they do make him a priority, as I talked about after the draft, he's essentially unlike anything that they have. I mean, he's a lot of people say he doesn't play as fast as his 40 time at the profile at the combine, but obviously he's pretty darn fast enough, and he's big and he's physical, and they really don't have anybody like him. Juju's probably the closest that they have to him as far as physicality, but Juju's not 6'4", and I'm not even sure if Juju's as fast as Claypool. In fact, I don't think he is. So, he's an intriguing young prospect, and I can't wait to see what they do with him starting in week 1, 2 weeks from Monday. So that's another guy it'll be interesting to see what transpires with him over the remainder of training camp. And then one more thing I wanted to touch on in the first half of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony is the 3rd round pick, Alex Highsmith. He started to receive some kudos last week. Not as much as Claypool, but Tomlin did mention him a couple of times, and his position coaches started talking about him a little bit, and that's, again, I don't know, with the media coverage being so limited this year, it's hard to know if this is just team hype, right? And if how much of this is real, because let's be honest. I mean, how many draft picks were there? 6. They're not all going to pan out, and they're not all going to be great. Some of them are going to be out and out busts. That's just how it is every year. So I don't expect all 6 of these guys to live up to the praise that they're receiving in camp. Not that they're all receiving praise, but certainly, again, Claypool and Highsmith have been receiving some praise lately. But Highsmith is he's an important member of the Steelers' immediate future, because as I've said many times, as we've all talked about many times, the chances of Bud Dupree coming back next year are slim to none, and Nunn just left Slim just left the building. I think it's closer to none now. Brian Anthony Davis mentioned on Monday that he has all the faith in the world in Omar Khan to always make more salary cap room when the need arises, but I don't see them doing that with Bud Dupree. I just don't, unless he totally falls off the cliff this year in terms of production or has a major injury. I just don't see them being able to retain him. Because he's gonna, guys like him, guys that are premium pass rush and big bucks on the open market, and the money that he's gonna want, even if his production slips a little bit this year, the production he's gonna, or the money that he's gonna command on the open market, I think it's just gonna be too expensive for Pittsburgh to be able to afford. So they're gonna need to have a suitable outside linebacker to play opposite of TJ Watt, because let's be real, the lesser the talent on the other side, the more likely it is that TJ Watt's going to be less effective, because he's going to be double teamed the whole time. I mean, they're going to be doing that anyway because he's such a special talent. But if you have like an Anthony Chickalo on the other side, then that's just going to reduce Watt's effectiveness even more. But if you have an effective, productive player, even if he's not a Pro Bowler, if he's really, really good, like a Clark Hagens, for example, then that's just going to open things up more for TJ Watt. So that's last year Watt and Dupree, they combined. If you look at both the percentages of snaps that they both received on defense, it's roughly 90% between the two of them. So if and they were both really, really good last year, so that was part of it. But I think another part of it was the fact that they had Anthony Chickillo as their primary backup. And Anthony Chickillo was a decent reserve, but he was never going to be anything great. So if Highsmith has that ability, or if they think he has that ability to reach a level that beyond what an Anthony Chickillo could do, for example, I think you're gonna see that this year. I think he's going to get more defensive snaps. So those are the issues or the topics I wanted to discuss in the first half of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. And for those of you in the live chat, stay with me. For those of you on YouTube, keep watching. But for those of you listening, please download. Well, first of all, thank you for listening to part 1 of this episode. And please download part 2. And I will be back shortly for part 2 of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. And I'm back. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me again on this. Well, I don't know what day. If you're listening on one of our many podcasting platforms, I don't know which day it is for you, but I hope it's a great one. But I just have a couple more things I want to discuss in part 2 of this episode, and I would be remiss if I did not. Oh, actually, before I get to that, I wanted to talk about one more thing that had to do with this year's training camp, or last week's training camp, and that was something that Mike Thomas said about when asked about the right tackle battle between Shuk Okorafor, the third-year man out of Western Michigan, and Zach Banner, the fourth-year man out of USC. And he said, what he basically said was that they were getting their butts whipped on a daily basis by TJ Watt, which I guess is not surprising, because he's maybe the best outside linebacker in the world right now. I mean, he's just that good, and he's probably destined to be named Defensive Player of the Year, if not this year, then in the very near future. I mean, he's really heading into his prime, so it's no shocker that he's beating them up pretty good in practice every day. But does that mean that they're is that the whole iron sharpening iron kind of thing that Mike Tomlin likes to say? I mean, does this mean that they're making progress? I mean, you'd like to see them win some battles, and again, that's where not having preseason games maybe hurts as far as fan perception, maybe media perception, because you'd like to see these guys going up against maybe not TJ Watt, but another team's pass rusher, and just to see where they're at, because obviously TJ Watt's the best they have on the team. I mean, how are they doing against Bud Dupree? I don't know. Do they ever have to go up against him? How are they doing against Ola? How are they doing against Tuzar Skipper? How are they doing against Alex Highsmith? These are things we haven't heard much about. All we know so far is that they're not handling TJ Watt really well. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. That's just something I noticed. It's nice to learn your craft while going up against the best in the world. But does it mean that you're ready for the prime time? I don't know. I just want to hear some easier said than done, obviously, but I'd like to hear some stories of one or both of those guys handling TJ Watt, because TJ Watt, they might not ever have to face anybody the level of TJ Watt during the regular season, but they're going to be facing some pretty darn good pass rushers. And I like to think that they're going to be able to hold their own more often than not. So that's another thing worth keeping an eye on for the rest of training camp, just to see who wins that battle. All right. And a couple more things I want to talk about. And this isn't really a training camp thing. It's more of a what a great news story kind of thing. And that's the fact that Bill Nunn, the late, great, legendary scout of this longtime scout, he was with them for 45 years, I think, or from the late 60s through the early 2010s, I think, before he finally retired. And he was named a finalist for the 2021 Hall of Fame class as a contributor. And I think it seems to be a foregone conclusion that he's got to get voted in. I think he's waited long enough. Obviously, he passed away, as I alluded to. He passed away in 2014. So I think the fact that he's a finalist tells me that he's going to make it. And I think it's a great honor because people may forget or may not even realize how much he contributed to the Steelers, not just their success of the 70s, but their overall legacy. Because he was a writer and an editor of the Pittsburgh Courier, which is one of the most influential black newspapers in the entire country, and he had an all African American team that he named each year, basically of players from small black colleges, and these were colleges where scouts hardly ever even bothered to go and evaluate players back then. And they just never considered those schools as prime schools to mine for NFL prospects. And Bill Nunn, when he was hired by the Steelers, they took notice of these teams that he named each and every year, and they asked him to be a part-time scout in the late 60s, and ultimately in 1970 they brought him on full-time, or maybe it was 69, it doesn't matter, it was around that time period, and he was proved to be the entree to, this opened up a pipeline of so many great players that come through here in the early 70s. Guys like Mel Blount and Dwight White and L.C. Greenwood and Donnie Shell, who just got elected to the 2020 Hall of Fame class, and John Stallworth, most famously perhaps, because there was a little bit of shenanigans that went on with that. Stallworth, the story goes, didn't run a great 40 time during his official workout. He hailed from Alabama A&M, which was another small black college. And Bill Nunn stuck around for an extra day and timed Stallworth himself in the 40 and kind of kept that time to himself in the Steelers. And the Steelers, there was a tape of Stallworth's college highlights that the Steelers always claimed that they couldn't find, because I guess this tape was supposed to be passed around from team to team to team. And the Steelers kind of kept it because they knew this guy. They could see that because I guess apparently everybody in the organization at that time watched this tape. They were just intrigued by Stallworth's talent, from Chuck Noll to Art Rooney Jr., the head scout, to obviously Nunn and whomever else. Everybody wanted to watch this tape, so they just kind of like pretended like they couldn't find it, and they kind of wanted to. Chuck Noll, if you ever read the book Their Life's Work, great book. It chronicles the teams of the 70s. Chuck Noll was like wringing his hands. He really wanted Stallworth in the first round, but they convinced him, not easily, but they convinced him that they could get him later if they just held on. And of course, they drafted Swan in the first round. Who was the second? Jack Lambert was the second round pick that year. I forget who the third round pick was. And then of course, fourth round pick was Stallworth, and they landed him. And of course, the rest is history. One of the greatest receiving duos ever, and they both Swan and Stallworth were major contributors to those Super Bowl teams. Not just those seasons, but actual clutch moments in those Super Bowls. I mean, they were pivotal in them winning some of those Super Bowls. So. It just shows you like what you can do as not just an organization, but just a person. If you think outside the box, like if you're always about, look, this is how we've always done things, and we're going to keep doing things this way. Well, that's a good way to maybe hold yourself back. But the Steelers saw, a way to be innovative, and they saw that these small black colleges weren't really being. Scouts weren't visiting them, and obviously they were able to find a lot of great players, some of whom were in the Hall of Fame. And it's another thing that I think is neat is that how much this came together at the right time for them in the late 60s into the early 70s. Obviously, the late Dan Rooney became the driving force of the organization by that point. The lovable Art Rooney, the chief, he was he ran the organization for years, but he was not, he was a great ambassador, but he probably wasn't the greatest football guy ever. And Dan Rooney came along and and he sort of became the president by the late 60s, if not officially, certainly unofficially. And he convinced his dad to hire Chuck Noll, and of course they brought Bill Nunn on as one of their chief scouts. So it's like serendipitous. Is that the word? Serendipity. It just everything just came together at once. All the stars aligned, and it brought you arguably the greatest collection of talent ever seen on a NFL roster for a number of years. And maybe it might be the reason why I'm sitting here doing this podcast right now, and why you're watching me do this podcast, because of the legacy that this all helped create. The Steelers went from, I don't know if they were lovable losers at that point. I don't think anybody even cared about them for 40 years, to one of the most popular sports or teams in all professional and collegiate sports. They're a worldwide sensation. And the fact that this all started in the late 60s, when everything just sort of came together, I think it's pretty neat. And I think it's long overdue that, and if Bill Nunn does get elected, which again, to reiterate, I think he will, he'll be the first person of color to be elected to the Hall of Fame, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, as a contributor. So it's going to be a great honor if and when it does happen. So I have one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that's the tremendous speech, as I'm sitting here, just occurred Friday night, when right before the Steelers had a simulated away game at Heinz Field, a night game. The speech that Mike Tomlin gave, and it was about obviously the social climate of the country right now, and everything that the country is experiencing, and how football, whether you want to hear about it or not, football and sports in general are intertwined with this, and actually they always have been. It's more noticeable now, again, with social media. It makes everything more intimate. So, and I don't want to get too much into the message, but it was about unity and about how he and the team acknowledge the issues that the country is going through right now, and that they want to be a positive part of it. But I think that speech and the command that he showed, I mean, he was standing there in the middle of Heinz Field, surrounded by his players who were standing arm in arm, and his bosses, Art II and Kevin Colbert, the general manager, although I think they might be more colleagues than whatever, him and Kevin. I don't think Kevin's really his boss, but that's beside the point. But like the command that he had, and the authority that he spoke with, and the eloquence. I mean, this guy is a leader. And if you wanted to know why Mike Tomlin's always been such a successful coach, take a look at that speech. Who was in charge right there? Who was in charge of that whole situation? It was Mike Tomlin. And people always ask, often, smugly, when they talk about when they criticize Mike Tomlin, you hear this question a lot. It's a rhetorical question. What has Mike Tomlin ever done to win a game? Please tell me, because I'm trying to figure it out. I'm really asking, what has he done? I'll wait. Tell me. As if he can make it 14 years. Anybody can make it 14 years as a head coach in the NFL and be as successful as he's been and accomplish all the things that he's accomplished with the Steelers. As if you can do all that without knowing X's and O's and without having a general foundation for football. If you ever watch the guy at training camp, there's no question the guy knows what he's doing when it comes to the actual nuts and bolts of football. But if you really want to know what makes him a successful head coach and why everybody loves him, all the players, not just his players, but players around the league love him, just take a look at that speech last night. I mean, that's a guy that you just want to follow. That's a guy that you want to get behind. That's a guy that you trust, right? That's always going to be blunt and honest with you. And if you look at most coaches and managers, their greatest strength, the great ones, their greatest strength is managing people, managing egos, managing personalities. That's what, if you ever look at an old documentary about a memorable season or a championship season from any team in any sport, and when they interview the players, they don't talk about necessarily the strategy that their coach or manager used. They always talk about how he kept them together, he kept them focused, he kept them loose, he kept them grounded, right? They talk about how he handled them in certain situations, both on the field or on the court or on the rink, or privately, how they handled them, how they coached them, right? I think that's what, because these guys, these players, no matter what sport is, the fundamentals are drilled into them constantly. I mean, they we forget that they're in meetings all day long, 5 days a week or whatever. I think they're off on Tuesdays in the NFL, but the point is they're in meetings. They actually go to work all day long. So the fundamentals are being drilled into them. But I think the most important part is how you manage 53 huge egos. Because let's be honest, if you're good enough to make it in the NFL, and if you're good enough to be a star in the NFL, you're probably gonna have a pretty huge ego. Dwight White once said about Chuck Noll, the thing often said about Chuck Noll was that he loved to teach. That was his favorite thing, and a lot of people said that was his biggest strength as a coach. And Dwight White said, "Oh, I mean, he was good at that, but I think his greatest strength was he was the manager of personalities." And those Steelers teams of the 1970s, they had a lot of interesting personalities, and Dwight White was one of them. I mean, take a look at your linebackers. Could you get any more different than the mean and gruff and tough and in your face Jack Lambert and the kind of quiet and cool Jack Ham? And those guys were roommates on the road, I believe. But they were friends for sure, and they worked together. If you look at the end of Super Bowl X and the game clinching huge touchdown catch by Lynn Swann, the 64-yarder or whatever it was, who was the first person out there to greet him? Jack Lambert. Can you find, at least outwardly, two players that were more different than those two, and yet they were embracing, and they all worked together? That's what a true head coach or great head coach or great manager, that's what, if you really, again, there are a few guys that when you think of them, you think of their X's and O's, or their ability to strategize, and Bill Belichick's one of them. He's the mad scientist, right? The genius. But more often than not, it's about managing personalities and keeping people together. That's what makes a great head coach. And I think, again, back to that speech at Heinz Field on Friday night, I think that was illustrated quite succinctly, quite perfectly in the way Tomlin addressed a very sensitive and important situation that's going to involve his football team, whether the fans like it or not. It's going to involve his football team in 2020. So that was pretty cool. And the expression "I'd run through a brick wall" for him gets thrown around a lot, but I think that's true of that speech. That's how I felt after. That's the guy I want to see leading the Pittsburgh Steelers. So those are all the topics I wanted to discuss today. And now I will take some time, 5, 10, 15 minutes, and answer some of your questions. So as I always say, ask away. And if anybody's joined me while I've was rambling on, thanks for joining me. Big Marv's here. What's good, Big Marv? There's Mule Skinner. Let's see here. Here's a comment from Mule Skinner. The successful teams do not fall into media traps and keep their political opinions close to their vest. Well, I don't know if their political opinions affect anything. The successful teams stay together regardless of their worldviews. I think, as I said earlier, with the managing of different personalities, Lynn Swann and Jack Lambert working together, despite being totally different personalities. It's not about keeping your political views close to the vest. I think when people say that, it's their way of saying, I don't like your political views, so shut up. It's not about that. It's about finding a way to work through them. Because I think athletes, since this stuff started happening 3 or 4 years ago, athletes have been able to handle themselves a lot better than the fans have when it comes to this stuff. So I think they'll be okay. The players will be okay, regardless of what you don't think those guys all have different opinions, and you don't think they discuss them? Of course they do. They're human beings. They're just like anybody else. We all discuss those kind of things and when we're having private conversations. It's just a matter of when it's time to play ball, it's time to play ball. And I think the teams that are successful this year, whether it's in football, baseball, hockey, whatever, they're going to be the ones that can stay focused even when they have all this stuff going on around them. So let's see here. Here's a question from Ezra. Good question. I actually wanted to talk about this today, and I completely forgot about it, but that's my fault. Should we actually put in the consideration of trying to sign Earl Thomas? I think I can see him next to Minka and Edmonds becomes Barron, meaning the role that Barron played last year, a 1-year rental. I don't know if they need him. I mean, if it was a matter of obviously he would be an upgrade in the secondary as far as just adding a new piece, into that secondary. But do they really need a guy like that? When you have a secondary that's now as strong as that one is, at least as of 2019, when you have a guy like Joe Hayden, and you have a Minka who's already one of the best safeties in the NFL, and Steven Nelson, who really came on last year and was quietly one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL, and Mike Hilton is one of the best slot corners. No, I don't think. Sorry, everybody. I seem to have some technical difficulties. It looks like my mic unplugged. If you can't hear me, let me know. If you can hear me now, let me know. If not, if I'm still having problems, I'll continue, and I'll keep a track here. But looks like we're back on track. But anyway, back to Earl Thomas. If he was the final piece to take that defense from mediocre to elite, then yeah, you risk it, because Mike Tomlin, again, he's a great leader of men, and maybe he could, if you get him in that locker room, meaning an Earl Thomas who's had some problems recently, you get him. Thank you for updating me, Ed. Yes, I'm officially back on. You can hear me again, and again, I apologize, but if it's a matter of again taking that defense from mediocre to elite, I think you risk it. I think it's worth a risk for a year. But that defense is so strong now. There's enough key players there at key positions. Again, as I said before, Edmonds is the weak link, but is he really a liability, or is he just least impactful player in a really impactful secondary? A secondary that's full of guys that are Pro Bowlers. A guy like Minka is an All-Pro. Joe Hayden's a Pro Bowler, right? Steven Nelson, again, is one of the best in the business, and Mike Hilton's one of the better slot corners in the league. So, if you're not out there making play after play after play, people think you're a liability. But he started 2 full seasons, and I don't think he would have started these many games already if he was really that much of a liability. So I think you stick with what you have this year, and you don't worry about a player like Earl Thomas. Here's one from Army Ross. I like that name. Besides depth on the defensive line of the ball, we just need everyone to stay healthy. We could beat any team healthy. Well, I mean, the big piece of the puzzle is Big Ben, and he's looking better than ever. And then, of course, you have that defense. I think if that defense is even close to what it was last year, then having Big Ben back, having Roethlisberger back, leading that offense, which has enough weapons, even without Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, it has enough weapons. I think you could have you are going to be capable of beating any team in the NFL. Fortunately, they don't have the Chiefs on their schedule, and that might be the exception. But hey, if they play them in the playoffs, if you told me that right now that they would meet the Chiefs in the playoffs, I would sign my name. I would sign my name in blood, because I'd welcome that opportunity in a few months. Here's one from Big Marv. Do you think our defense will be at the top of the league this year? Yeah, and I'm saying that because they're returning everybody, just about except for Javon Hargrave, and essentially he's being replaced by Stephon Tuitt, who, when he's at the top of his game, is among the best in the NFL. One of the most impactful defensive ends in the NFL when he's at his best. His problem so far
throughout his career is being able to stay healthy. But when he's healthy, there are times when he looks like the most dominant guy on that defensive line. So, I mean, as far as takeaways, I don't know if they're going to have as many takeaways. Sacks, I would be more inclined to say that they will have around the same amount of sacks they've had since 2017 because they've been pretty consistent in that department again since the second half of the 2016 season. They've been consistent with getting after the quarterback, and they have so many guys that are good at doing that now. They have obviously T.J. Watt and Bud Dupree, and you can't double team both of those guys. Cam Hayward's really good at getting after the quarterback. He's come on the last few years with pressuring the quarterback. Obviously, to it. Vince Williams has been a really consistent pass rusher dating back to 2017. So they're able to bring pressure from so many different places. Mike Hilton is really good at blitzing the quarterback. So I think they're going to be. Are they going to be as good as they were last year? I don't know. They might be even better. But I think they're so young and talented yet that I don't see a massive drop off. It feels like you're just getting started when it comes to. This defense felt like a bit of a liability as recently as 2 years ago, 2018, when John Bostic was covering who was it, Keenan Allen in that Chargers game. So it feels like they're just getting started with having an elite defense. So I don't see a major drop off just yet. I think this defense is going to be among the best in the NFL. Obviously, unless there's a huge injury, I think it's going to be among the best in the NFL for the next couple of years. And again, that's why. Beyond, if you're looking into 2021, if you want to go that far ahead, that's why guys like Alex Highsmith, their development is going to be important because you're going to want to keep that defensive train rolling for as long as possible. So here's one from Hector Hernandez. Comment: Steelers tend to do well when they are overlooked. This is certainly a year where they're not considered among the favorites. I mean, they are considered. I think people expect them to be a little bit better. Although Colin Cowherd, I think that guy's gone back and forth all off season. Now he's saying he thinks they're going to finish below 500, but certainly they're not considered among the favorites to win a Super Bowl this year. It's the Chiefs, it's the Ravens. In the NFC, I guess it's the Vikings. Not is it the Vikings? Maybe I don't know. The Packers are always considered a contender with Aaron Rodgers, and the 49ers and Seattle's. Expected to do well. So, there are a lot of teams that are in that Super Bowl contender line, and Pittsburgh's sort of on the outside looking in right now. But all it takes is a few games to change that perception. And if they go out and they get off to a fast start, maybe they beat up the Ravens and whatever they play them the first. I don't think they played them until about halfway through the year, but I could be wrong. If they get off to a hot start, then it's going to change people's minds. But they've missed the playoffs the last 2 years, and Ben's 38 and coming off a major elbow surgery, so it might take a while to convince people that they are a legit contender. But I think they can be. Neil Skinner, that's a comment I can get behind. I am picking the Steelers to beat the Chiefs and give Ben one more Super Bowl ring. Well, that's fine by me. That's a comment I can get behind. Wow. Here's one from Ezra. This is great. This is like the Steelers rally show. Ryan? He's saying to Ryan O'Toole, Steelers 26, Saints 20 in the Super Bowl, I guess, and TJ MVP again. That's another comment I can get fully behind. So I like it. Here's one from Portna Quinba. If we don't make the playoffs this year, that will be 3 years in a row. Who should be held accountable? Well, the usual suspects. Mike Tomlin would absolutely should be held accountable. He'll be the first person to tell you that if they miss. Provided Ben's healthy, provided there's not another catastrophic injury like last year, if they miss the playoffs again, then yeah, it's always the head coach that's held accountable. Now, I think when some people say held accountable, it's another way of saying fired. But I don't think Tomlin's going to get fired if they miss the playoffs the third year in a row. But will his seat get a little warmer? Perhaps. Yeah, I could certainly see that. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. Here's one from Donald Nolan. This is a lot of great Super Bowl predictions. Steelers versus Bucks in Super Bowl. That would be Ben versus Brady. I'll sign up for that. He continues. Ben gets redemption and destroys Bucks and wins Super Bowl, solidifying his place in Canton. Wow, 45-6 Steelers win. I hope for the top. You know, Donald, the maybe you mentioned that in the comment. That Super Bowl is in Tampa, so that'd be like a home game for the Bucks. But hey, we know how the Steelers. Well, I don't know if I almost said we know how Steelers fans travel, but I doubt fans will be allowed to attend the Super Bowl. And if they are, it probably won't be very many, maybe 20,000 by January or by February. But that wouldn't be much. I mean, if it is a neutral, if there aren't any fans, I guess it wouldn't matter that it's in Tampa. But I would definitely sign up for a Big Ben versus Brady Super Bowl, and I would definitely cherish every second of basically a 40-point win, because that's one thing I haven't seen in my entire life watching the Steelers is an easy Super Bowl victory. Obviously, I've only personally witnessed 3 wins, and they were all nail biters. So I'd welcome that for sure. That's why one of my favorite games ever was the AFC Championship game against the Broncos in 2005, because that was pretty much a laugh from beginning to end. That was very enjoyable. There were some tense moments in the fourth quarter, but for the most part, it was a runaway. So that was nice, and it was rare. Hector Hernandez, will Washington step up? I already think he has. I thought he did last year. I thought he really, again, as I always say, he didn't. I mean, he didn't have a lot to improve on. Is that the right grammar? I mean, he barely did anything in his first season. So any kind of improvement last year would have been stepping up, but he stepped up big time. He led the team in receiving yards at 735, and that's with shaky quarterback play all year. So I think to me that showed me something. That showed me that he could be a valuable weapon in this offense. If him and Ben get on the same page, which they had a hard time doing his rookie year, and even that first game last year in New England, there were some. It seemed like they weren't on the same page. So if he gains Ben's trust, look out, because there's going to be enough. There are going to be enough weapons. There's certainly going to be enough targets to go around for Ben. He's not going to be focusing on one specific player like he used to have to do with AB. So, I think he can step up. I think he already has, and I think he can take his play to a whole new level this year, because he has a future Hall of Fame quarterback who looks like he's going to be close to 100% healthy. Let's see. I think that's about all I have for today. That was actually a fun show. I really enjoyed it today. Again, if you didn't hear the first half of today's podcast, if you're not watching me on YouTube right now, please go back and check out the first half, and thank you for listening to the second half, and thank you all in the live chat for joining me for another fun episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you Monday night with Brian Anthony Davis on Steelers Q&A. Take care, everybody.